Hey, hi there. Nice to meet you. You must be Trevin, right?
That's right, James, right?
That's right, yeah. Good to meet you. All right, have a seat.
Let's go. Thanks.
Uh huh. So tell me about yourself.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I've been pursuing a degree in environmental science for about 3 years now. I had a wetland ecology teacher that was really passionate about soil sciences and bringing that into botany and hydrology and all the various different elements of the environmental sciences and ecology.
Ah, I see.
And since then, I've just been really following my passion and curiosity, trying to learn as much as I can about every element of the earth sciences and biology and how they all interact in the interest of supporting conservation and restoration projects like the one that you guys have going right now.
Thanks, Trevin. Now I'd like for you to share an experience where you successfully shared a difficult piece of information.
Oh, yeah, sure. Do you mean difficult as in hard to display data sort of information, or difficult as in controversial or emotionally difficult?
It is a little vague, but that's on purpose. We want you to have a little flexibility when answering that.
Okay, gotcha. All right, well, here's a good example of a time that I've had to deal with that. One of my friends a couple years back was trying to understand binary, base 2 number systems, and their brain just was not really wired to understand it the way that textbooks and teachers had been teaching. So I tried to explain it to them. I started out doing the same strategy as any textbook that I've ever read would, and that wasn't working. And so I would try different ways of looking at it, sort of showing different perspectives. And personally, my favorite way, I think the most useful way to get things across like that, is to use models or analogies. And what ultimately ended up working was this analogy relating basically value to water and the each space, each 1 or 0 to a full or empty glass, and you have these different size glasses. And ultimately that ended up working really well. So I think the best strategy, in my opinion, is just to pivot the way that you're trying to explain something and to employ analogies or visual aids, any kind of model to help simplify a concept.
Thanks a bunch, Trevin.
Sure thing, James.
How about you tell me a little bit about how you organize, plan, and handle and prioritize work?
Do you need a minute to read over your questions?
Hey, I'm not the one being interviewed.
Yeah, fair enough. As far as planning ahead goes, I like to look first at the broad scale, maybe 6 months or 3 month period, and figure out what needs to be done regularly on a weekly basis in order to meet those long range goals, and then work to smaller and smaller chunks so I get to the day. And usually that on the day level, it looks like creating a to-do list and just checking those things off when they make sense. And when I can't finish everything in a day, rolling that over or planning for a different day later in the week where I can complete those things.
Excellent. All right, now I'd like for you to share an experience where you employed new technology, and how did that help you with whatever project you applied it to?
Yeah, so I worked at a farm for a while, and it was an organic farm, so we weren't using synthetic pesticides at all. We didn't use any pesticides, really. And the way we got around a lot of the problems solved by pesticides was really interesting. So, sort of twofold. The first issue that we ran into was weeds, of course. So instead of manually pulling all of them, we would use different colored fabric or plastic that we could put over rows, crop rows, puncture that, and then we'd put the starts in there, or the seeds, depending on how we were growing our crops. And it would suffocate the weeds. We had different color ones. The black ones were better for cooking weeds. The heat could get to them, so that was good for when we were growing tropical plants that could handle that heat. And we had white ones as well, which weren't quite as effective with the weeds. They would usually just block a lot of sunlight still, so they wouldn't be able to grow. But they were really good for cooler loving plants. And then we'd also have these reflective ones, and that was good for plants that were really susceptible to aphid infections. Because for whatever reason, the aphids, when the flying ones came to lay eggs, the reflective surface would scare them off or just deter them for some reason. So I thought that was a cool use of technology. it really cut down on labor costs and the amount of time we had to spend
Oh, yeah.
treating the fields.
Would you consider your skills with analyzing data a strength? If so, tell me about it. How? How so?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Honestly, I don't have a ton of experience analyzing data outside of schoolwork, but I will say when I analyze data in schoolwork, I always bring a high level of skepticism to the table. I'm never quick to make assumptions about data. I'm very methodical about how I analyze things, and I do think that that's a big strength of mine.
All right, give me an example of when you thought outside the box during work.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, just actually this happened a couple months ago, but I was operating a salmon trap, monitoring the summer chum run, and this is my first shift. I was alone. I was supposed to have a partner, but he didn't end up showing up, and my boss wasn't returning his phone calls.
Interesting. Tell me more.
We had this shed that would hold all of our waders, about 10 pairs of waders or so, and they were all hanging on this bar, and I heard something snap. I think it was held up by zip ties, if I recall correctly. And so all the waders were on the ground, and they're supposed to be drying out between shifts. And when they're all bunched up on the ground, that's pretty much useless. There's no surface area to be drying. So I went to my car and I looked around and found some ropes, and I was able to. It took a while. It was pretty hard to get everything maneuvered in this tiny little shed, but I was able to get just random little ropes that I found in my car tied on and get the wetsuits or the waders up and drying again.
Mm-hmm. Great. How would you rate your writing skills?
Oh, I would rate my writing skills very highly. I have a lot of experience writing in a lot of different tones. I write lyrics for music, I write my own fiction, and I do a lot of nonfiction writing for school and assignments. So I have a lot of experience varying the voice that I'm using to fit the audience and the purpose of my writing. And I'm an avid reader. I read tons of nonfiction and even textbooks for fun. And so I have a lot of experience with writing, and I a lot of exposure to conventions.
Cool. Thanks, Trevin. Now, I'd like for you to name a time when you identified strengths and weaknesses to an alternative solution to a problem. What was the impact?
Yeah, during my recent internship, some of my co-interns and I were tasked with creating a weed identification guide. The idea being that future interns could use this to know how to best treat weeds. So we would identify them, learn about the best ways to either pull them or cut them with a weed whacker, whatever was the most effective at long-term suppression, and we put that into the guide. And I joined after the basic skeleton had been decided, or we had an initial idea. My co-interns had an initial idea, which was that it would be organized alphabetically. And so when I showed up, as somebody who I love reading identification guides, I have a lot of opinions about them, and first thing that came to mind is if these people are trying to identify a plant, chances are they don't know what the name is. Otherwise, they wouldn't really need the guide. So the alphabetized list doesn't really help that much. If you have a guess, you think, oh, maybe it's a dandelion, you go to D and look. But I think that the functionality of that is quite limited. And so I proposed an alternative way of doing it. We had two different options, really, that I put forth, and we ended up going with the one that I think is targeted more towards botanical, knowledgeable group, but we were going to either go with flower color or plant family. We ended up going with plant family in part because we had a lot of horsetails, and they don't have flowers, so it fit easier to do plant families. And that way, if you do know about the various plant families, it's not super difficult to figure out, if you have the flower, which family the weed that you're looking at is in. Like the Fabaceae, the legume family, pretty distinctive flowers, or Asteraceae. And so we ended up going with that. And I think that increased the functionality quite a bit.
Cool. Thanks, Trevin. Now go ahead and tell me about a time where you presented information to a large group. How'd it go?
This actually reminds me of the wetland ecology class that I mentioned way back at the beginning of the interview. During that class, one of the assignments was to create a guided tour that we ended up presenting to whoever was interested in coming. It was actually on National Wetland Day. That was a lot of fun. And I remember thinking, all right, before I took this class, what are some of the things that, now that I have this information, would have really been interesting for me to learn? Things about how slow peat forms, or how beavers interact with the wetland, that kind of thing. And so I thought about what would be the most interesting information when I was writing what I would present. And when I actually went out to present the information, I was really trying my best to use layman terms rather than scientific terms that I'd been learning in class. And so it took a lot of translation, really. But it was cool because I think it also helped me synthesize knowledge a little better, translating more complex science terminology into less precise but a little bit more illustrative or easy to visualize terminology. And it was a lot of fun.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for the robust response. Now I'd like for you to name a time when you used scientific rules or methods to successfully address a problem at work.
Sure thing. Yeah, so one of the problems working on an organic farm, as I've talked about before, is the weeds popping up without synthetic pesticides to tackle them. You got to find alternative measures. And one of the ways that we dealt with a lot of weeds at the food forest component of the farm at Water's Edge was mulching. And now growing up, whenever I used mulch with my parents or any volunteer work that I did, we would do 4 inches of mulch. And it was my impression that was plentiful. That was more than enough. But we were thinking about it a little bit more analytically and having some conversations about how much you really need. And somebody mentioned compaction as something to consider. The idea with the 4 inches, which that was an estimate at the time, but we looked into it. Apparently, 4 inches is really a good amount for mulching. But the idea behind that 4 inches is that most weeds aren't able to penetrate through that with the amount of energy they have as seeds before running out of energy in their roots. Essentially, 4 inches is enough to suffocate them or prevent them from photosynthesizing. But the thing that we didn't consider is the compaction. Now, if you put 4 inches of mulch down, that's a lot of air. And when people walk on it, animals or humans or wheelbarrows especially, it gets packed down to about half of its size. So ultimately, when we had enough mulch, we would shift to doing about 8 inches of mulch, which felt like overkill, but thinking ahead, it was probably what we actually needed the whole time.
Absolutely. Well, it was a real pleasure talking to you, Trevin. You sure are a charismatic guy. Ooh, that's a firm handshake. All right, you have a good rest of your day now.
You too, James. It was good talking to you.